Thank you. Okay, so we're waiting for a number of people to join us, but hopefully they won't be too long. Ah, here's somebody now. Neil now. Hello, Neil. Are you with us?
Yes, I'm with you.
Hi, Neil. We're just starting. We've just pressed record on the meeting. Okay, so welcome everybody to the.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's lovely to have you with us, and welcome everybody. We're going to do some introductions in a minute because there's a lot of people here today. But I just want to let you all know that this meeting is being broadcast live and it is being recorded. So if you're not familiar with Teams, please have a look around and make sure that you know where your raise hand button is, because that's how I will know as chair that you wish to speak. So I'm chairing the meeting. I will try and make sure that everybody who wishes to speak does get their chance to speak. And if you are not speaking, please keep yourself on mute to avoid background noise. Okay. So we'll do some introductions. I'm Mary. I'm the chair of this committee. Ryland.
Hello, I'm Ryland. I'm the vice chair of the committee. Cheers.
Peter.
I'm trying to unmute.
You're unmuted.
Hello, Chair. Sorry. I'm having problems by the look of it. Anyway, I'm Councillor Peter Jones. I'm the Council's Biodiversity Champion and chair its Natural Environment Scrutiny Performance Panel. Thank you.
Thanks. Leslie.
Hi, I'm Councillor Leslie Walton, representing Town Hill Ward.
Thanks. Kelly.
Hi everyone, I'm Councillor Kelly Roberts from the Signing Ward.
Oh, you're ever so quiet, Kelly. Nice to have you with us. I think that's actually all the committee members that we have with us today. So I'm going to go on and ask the council officers to introduce themselves, but I think our legal advisor wants me first. Hello, Craig.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry to raise my hand at this point. Simply to say, well, firstly, I'm Craig Davis from the legal department, but mainly from a reason to raise the hand, as Mr. Jones, Councillor Jones, has just raised that he had an issue with the internet or the bandwidth. If anyone is having a difficulty with their screen freezing or anything such as that, perhaps turn off the camera, as that often then allows your end to stream a little bit better. Thank you.
Legal and technical advisor. Thank you very much, Craig. Jeremy.
Jeremy Parkhouse, Democratic Services.
Thank you, Joe.
I'm Jo Portwood. I'm a Policy and Strategy Officer.
Thank you. I'm not going to ask Caroline to introduce herself. I know that she's just here to record the meeting. Right, so that brings us on to our guests for today. So if you could just say who you are and why you're here. Obviously, you're here because I've asked you to come and I'm very glad to see you, but other committee members would like to know what your role is. Thanks very much. We'll start with Witch Hazel, please.
Hi there, I'm Witch Hazel Wildwood. I'm on the committee of Swansea Community Growing Network, and I was formerly the project support worker, but now Catherine is, who's here today. And I'm also a project manager for the Orchard Project, which is a new Swansea base for a national organisation, and our role is to set up urban orchards in Swansea. I'm also occasionally a mentor for Social Farms and Gardens. So that's formerly the Federation of City Farms and Community Gardens. So I also have a link with them as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And Witch Hazel mentioned Catherine. Would you like to go next, Catherine? Are you there, Catherine? Might come back to Catherine. Tony, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, my name's Anthony Roper. I'm here in the capacity as a disabled person representing the co-production network.
Thank you. In due course, I mean, really quite soon after this initial meeting, as the policy that we are developing starts to take shape, we're going to open this discussion out more widely, have a bigger conversation about it. But I thought it would be good to have somebody from the co-production network involved from the beginning. Thank you, Tony. Neil.
Hello, everybody. Yes, I'm Neil Barry. So I work with the Swansea Community Green Spaces project. So it's working with lots of local communities to help them make better use of publicly owned green spaces, excuse me, whether that be for food growing or for wildlife or environmental use or social benefits. And I'm also the project officer for the Cliddock Community Garden as well, which is an offshoot of that project.
Thanks. I know that through the Community Growing Network, Neil is supporting a number of small community groups that are growing food as well. Owen, hi Owen, you there?
Hello, hi everybody. I'm Owen. I'm an artist and I work with communities and have been working in Swansea for many years. I work across Wales with communities around food, urban agriculture and community development, and I set up the Veg Garden in Swansea years ago with the Cultural Olympiad, and currently run Graft, which is a edible garden and community project at the National Waterfront Museum, and I recently joined the Swansea Community Growing Network.
Thanks, Owen. Catherine, are you able to contribute? Are you there?
Do you mean me, Kat?
Oh, do I mean you? Sorry, I might mean you. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yep, my name is Kat. I'm here with Tony as part of the co-production network. I'm also a full-time wheelchair user and I'm very interested in this process.
Okay, thanks, Kat. Sorry, on my screen, all I could see was a K, and I thought you were going to be Catherine Aylett, who is the new coordinator of Swansea Community Growing Network, but you're not, but that's fine. It's lovely to have you here, and I guess Catherine hasn't been able to join us. Maybe she'll be along later. So that completes our introductions. I don't think I've missed anybody. We have apologies from the Cabinet member Alison Pugh, who normally manages to join us, and the Head of Adult Services, Amy Hawkins, is going to be joining us later. She has a clash for the first part of this meeting. And I've also received apologies from Councillor Erica Kirchner and Councillor Christine Richards. So I think that concludes our present and apologies. Can we just, oh, hello, Leslie.
Yeah, sorry, just suddenly thought that it would be relevant for me to say that I was one of the co-founders of the Mayhill Washing Lake and Community Food Garden, and also the fact that you mentioned the Orchard Project. Jeff, husband, is very involved in that side of things, as you are probably fully aware.
Thanks, Les.
Thank you.
Thank you. Peter?
Yeah, good. Yes, perhaps following on from Leslie's comment there, perhaps I should mention that a few years ago I was involved in the Transition Towns movement here in Swansea, and we endeavoured to establish some kind of community growing project. But unfortunately, although there was a lot of enthusiasm, including mine, we weren't able to make progress because there wasn't the proper level of organisation. But I certainly got that background experience. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Now, I don't think anyone has any personal or prejudicial interest. Leslie's declaration is noted. I should also just make it clear that I am employed by Gower Power Co-op KIC, and we do provide funding for community growing projects. I don't believe that that represents a conflict of interest, but I might from time to time mention my work with Gower Power just for context, that you're all aware that that's going on. So can we first just start the meeting by approving the minutes of the previous meeting? Can anyone propose those as accurate?
Yeah, I can propose them.
Thanks, Ryland. And Leslie? Leslie, happy to
Sorry,
second
sorry,
that.
did you hear that? I'll second. I pressed the wrong flipping button.
Okay, thanks, Leslie. Okay, thanks. Right, so we only have one agenda item really. Well, no, we're going to go on to discuss the work plan more generally, but the main part of our meeting today is just to discuss the need for a new policy to support community growing. So we aim to produce a policy which sets out in a transparent manner how the council will make land available for food growing on a basis that's not allotments. So it's not for exclusive private use by anybody. And we've got a lot of things that we need to discuss about how that policy would work. We are also bearing in mind the need for a policy to govern garden sharing, really just as a for the council to offer out in a supportive manner that householders can use for their own private agreements about how they share their gardens to free them up for food growing. But I think we're going to have more of a discussion about that specifically at a later date. At the moment, I'm just trying to gather kind of examples of garden sharing projects that people might be aware of around the UK. We do have the Room to Grow project, which has taken off really well in Uplands, which is my own ward. And I did invite them to come along today, but on the understanding that that's not the main area of discussion today. Main area of discussion is the more general food growing policy, community growing policy that we need to get sorted. So we do have a model which Joe very kindly found for us from Monmouthshire, which is really based on the incredible edible approach. And I would really welcome a sort of general discussion about how effective we think an approach like that would be in Swansea, and any alternative suggestions, or how the Monmouthshire model could be tweaked to be more effective and appropriate for us here in Swansea. Hello, Tony, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I've had a look through the document, and it leaves a lot to be desired, to be honest with you, because you know, you can go up to a quarter of an acre, right, but you can't put any structure on there, right, and it looks as if you've got to go around the mulberry bush to get a fence around it, you know. I've seen examples of allotments, although these are not allotments, right? I've seen examples of allotments whereby they've planned them open plan, no fencing, and then to their detriment, they've had to come back and put fencing around it, you know, and high fencing at that, you know, because it was just disintegrating, nothing left.
Okay, thanks for that. Peter.
Yes, thank you, Chair. First of all, a question which perhaps Joanne is able to answer. I noticed that the scheme came to committee in Monmouthshire back in 2013. Can you tell us, first of all, just how successful or not, as the case might be, it's been since then?
Yeah, that would be great. Joe, please, if you've got any information about that.
Yeah, okay, so I did a bit of research. Unfortunately, the lady who used to lead the project retired about 2 or 3 weeks ago, but eventually I managed to find somebody in Monmouthshire, and it's part of their rural development programme. So yeah, they said that the take-up has been very good, although we haven't got exact numbers at the moment because unfortunately this lady is retired. And, you know, overall, they seem to suggest it was very successful, not only in terms of food growing, but in terms of bringing sort of the community together. So other benefits in addition to the growing as well. If it's helpful, maybe I could invite somebody to join the committee so you can ask specific questions to that person. But overall, yes, I think it was Incredible Edible who helped them sort of set up their policy. So they work very closely to that model used in Todmorden. So
yeah, my understanding is that actually the officer, probably the officer who retired, was originally from Todmorden herself. So she was very familiar with that whole model and she kind of brought it to Monmouthshire. So my understanding is that I do understand how the Incredible Edible approach is really great for encouraging a shared sense of ownership of space and just a general awareness of food, just always being in your peripheral vision, and awareness of how food gets, you know, from soil to plate. People just become more familiar with food and with growing and agriculture and horticulture just being normal things that happen, that they witness in passing as they go about their daily life, and that all of that is really empowering and helps people develop skills. What I'm not really sure about is the quantity of food that actually gets produced, and whether as a sort of food security intervention, trying to improve ongoing food security, particularly for people on low incomes, the Incredible Edible model is worth us considering. That's really something that I'd like to unpick a bit more today. Peter, you have your hand up again.
Yeah, so yes, it's just really a continuation. Just 2 points, if I may. First of all, I note that rightly Monmouth were concerned that they would create what they call a straightforward process. I have to say, having read through the document, it didn't strike me as particularly straightforward. There are quite a lot of hoops to be jumped through, conditions to be met, and so on. So I think that's a point to be borne in mind when thinking about the design of a possible scheme here in Swansea. And the only other point I'd make at the moment, with reference to point 2.3 in Appendix 3 on page 12, he says, there's a list of types of land that cannot be included under a community growing scheme. I would add one further, sites that are subject to biodiversity protection, which aren't listed in that, which seems to me of particular importance. But that's all I want to say at the moment, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I've got a number of people wishing to speak. I think I've noted down the order in which you put your hands up, but forgive me if I make a mistake. So first I've got Ryland.
Sorry, I've just realised that I misread the document, because the issue I wanted to raise as the document I thought was highlighted, which could be used for green open space, included grass verges, but I subsequently, just as Peter mentioned, what can't be used, realised that the grass verges can't be used. So in a way that negates my point, so I'm happy to move on. So let somebody else.
Well, but they can't be used in Monmouthshire Island, but maybe we decide that they could be used in Swansea.
Yes, I was going to say how have they used it in Monmouthshire?
Right. Yeah.
So,
okay.
Yeah, that's
okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. So next I have Neil.
All right. Okay. Thanks. Yeah. A few of the points that that people had raised. First one's good point, Tony, about the security issues. Out of most allotments, as you rightly say, have to have high fences around them, which is understandable in some ways, because often people store valuable tools and so on in their sheds as well, and that sometimes is what is the attraction for break-ins. But I'm sure, Leslie, you might be able to comment on this as well. At Mayhill, I mean, it's totally open there, isn't it? There's no security or fences or anything, and to my knowledge, there hasn't been any significant amounts of damage. I mean, it goes with the territory, unfortunately, in a lot of places like this, that there will be a certain amount of damage done and things like that. But, you know, you just kind of have to live with it and accept, you know, that, you know, it's the same at a few places that things have happened and people just, you know, move on and think, you know, not let a few people spoil it for everybody and just accept it on there. Yeah, I think it would be useful as well on Peter's point about take up to get an idea of the responsible points, you know, the take up in Monmouthshire. And about verges, the only issue about verges, Ryland, sort of, is that, you know, if you're growing food right at the edge of a busy road, there's issues about lead and fumes and so on there. It's a nice thing to show, sort of, so, and to maybe have it as a kind of a demonstration, but have a sign saying, please do not pick because of pollution, but, you know, show what people could grow, sort of, in those areas on there. So they were the points I wanted to add.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. I think we perhaps should come back to the pollution discussion, because I know in Todmorden they're very proud of having food all the way there at all the roadsides, but I know pollution is perhaps a concern, so we'll come back to that point. Tony, you were wanting to come in again?
Yeah, one thing that concerned me is that the people that's actually doing the work and growing the products, then it actually says that anybody can come along and take what they want. How is that going to work?
Yeah, this is one of the things that we need to unpick. So I think that the Todmorden experience really is that people love to grow stuff and they don't necessarily feel a sense of ownership of the produce. They love to grow it and cultivate it, and it improves the neighbourhood and makes the area feel nicer and look better. They don't necessarily mind who then consumes it. But for us as a poverty reduction committee, we might be quite keen to make sure that people on low incomes do actually access that produce. You know, and just because something gets grown that tastes better than what you can order from Waitrose doesn't mean that people who can afford to shop at Waitrose should have first pick at it. So this is exactly the sort of thing that we need to thrash out for this policy. Yeah. Witch Hazel. Oh, well, I'm sorry. I think Leslie was first. Yeah, sorry, Les. Go ahead. Sorry, Witch Hazel.
Okay, thanks. A couple of points. First of all, I'll pick up on what Neil was asking about Mayhill. I think we have only actually had one issue. We've got 2 lockable chests which we keep the equipment in, and somebody did try to get in one of them 2 or 3 years back, but since then, touch wood, they seem to have worked quite well. We also had an issue earlier this year where somebody decided to completely destroy and take apart the picnic table at the pond, and unfortunately this time we weren't able to do anything about it. But having said that, I think I totally agree with you, and you've got to say to yourself, okay, this is a bummer, I wish these people hadn't done that, how very antisocial, all the rest of it, and then say, let's think of a solution and get round it. And we will do that, and we've already got ideas of what to do about putting seating back there that won't be too expensive and hopefully will be far more difficult for anybody to try and take apart, but you don't know until you actually try these things out. So I just wanted to deal with that point. One thing I wanted to ask, I'd be very interested to know where Todmorden are now, because the video that you circulated was back in 2012, which is 8 years ago. Amazing woman, absolutely astounding. I thought, I was quite envious of the fact that she managed to do virtually the whole of that speech unscripted. I don't know whether she'd got notes somewhere and come out with funny bits and pieces to make the audience laugh. She was so invigorating, but I would be very interested to know where they've got, partly because being slightly political about it, they probably set up not long before the Tory government, 2010, and I'm not, without trying to cast too many aspersions, I think it's fair to say that their policies haven't necessarily been particularly aimed at greening areas, without trying to say anything too dicey. So, as I say, I'd be interested to see where they've got to, because again, picking up on Tony's point, the other issue, as you say, we want people to be able to access the food, those who need it most. And that's where you've got a big difficulty. And at the moment, as you say, our plot is totally open. Anybody can come and take any food. And ironically, at the moment, as far as I'm aware, very few do. And that's anybody, not just those who we would like to take advantage of it. So I do think that is quite an important issue that somehow we've got to address and hopefully solve, and encourage people to actually pick up the fruit and veg that they're entitled to. Thank you.
That's going to be about kind of publicity, isn't it? Publicity and awareness and stuff like that. But yeah, I believe Pam Warhurst was a former council leader, so she's got form on public speaking. But I believe that Todmorden is still doing really well, and Incredible Edible as an organisation is certainly doing really well. You know, and they had development workers around the UK, sadly no longer funded. But I did manage to have a conversation with the last Wales support worker quite recently, who's going to be sending me some helpful information. I've got Witch Hazel and then Owen, and then Neil, I don't know if your hand is still up from before or if you want to come in again, but I'll have Witch Hazel now, thanks.
Okay, thank you. So firstly, to just address a couple of comments so far, I've been to see Todmorden in the past, and yes, it was really impressive. And they also go along the canal as well as other areas. There's quite a few incredible edible projects across Wales, as you may know, so it would be worth looking at all of the different models around Wales of that. I do think it works really well in a kind of defined area like a village or town. I think that's one of the reasons it's worked really well in the places that it has worked. And I do wonder how well it would work. Swansea is quite kind of sprawling, and so it would be a very different experience. And the model suggested by Monmouthshire suggests that the project's the group's kind of set as quite self-isolated, really. It looks quite isolated. Each group just finds a bit of land and gets on with it. And I would hope there would be a more putting together than that, a more sort of cohesive thing. I wonder how the groups would get support. I wonder how in Monmouthshire they've supported them. It sounds like they've got workers, sustainability workers and things supporting them. Here we don't have any kind of council community growing team. And the community growing network has a capacity of half a day a week at the most, so we don't have capacity. So I wonder how those projects would get support with things like their basic constitution, insurance, and dealing with the licence and health and safety and stuff. You might have already discussed this, I don't know. I also, what was I going to say? Yeah, also my experience, interestingly, of working with growing projects, because I used to work at the community farm and other places, is that sometimes there is quite a problem getting the food used. It's very strange, but some people just love to grow and they don't pick the stuff, or they keep waiting and they don't want to pick it too soon or something. So actually, I think it's not necessarily a problem that people are growing and they're not picking it, because I think it's great to get it used. The most important thing is that the produce gets used. And as you say, I think it's not necessarily an issue that people mind growing and that other people will use it. So that's my experience anyway. Thank you.
It's fab. Thanks, Witch Hazel. And no, we haven't discussed anything before now. This is the very first meeting at which any of these things are being discussed. So everything is welcome and relevant. Thanks. Owen, do you want to go next?
Hi, thank you. Yeah, just some similar points to Witch Hazel, really, around scale. I mean, Todmorden, I've worked with the Todmorden people at Yorkshire Sculpture Park on projects as well, and hosted people and conversations and held things with those guys and other people across the UK. And I think scale is one of the big issues that we're looking at here. So, you know, Todmorden, Abergavenny, Monmouthshire, these are small scale kind of spaces with very different socioeconomic landscape to Swansea. We have massively disconnected communities in Swansea where, you know, you could live in one part of Swansea and never venture into other parts, perhaps, you know, so there are very isolated pockets. With that, then come different issues and different bonuses and pluses and different things. So what I'm saying is that each area is a very distinctive and different kind of politics and socioeconomic situation. So rolling something out in a blanket form, I don't think is going to work here. I also think that we need to look at education around food education here. So it's one thing growing this stuff. It's another thing teaching people how to cook it, how to connect to it seasonally, how to save seeds, all that stuff. So many people are facing such real issues of poverty, as you know on this committee, that, you know, actually just giving a load of people kale is not going to solve a poverty issue. It's a much more complicated and long-term dialogue. So I think if we were to resource this in Swansea, the council would really have to come in as a major partner and really kind of push these agendas and really think about the Todmorden stuff is great. It inspires people to grow food. But if you're looking at it to kind of like, I don't think the Todmorden stuff is combating poverty on a massive level. I think it's green washing a little bit. It's sort of successfully gaining kind of confidence in people growing food locally. It's reconnecting people. But what's ambitious and what's exciting about what you're talking about is saying, how will we use these ideas to actually shift the kind of way that people view civic landscape and also affect people's levels of well-being, mental health and physical through gardening and working together. So I think there's lots of overlapping issues there on scale and different things like that. And all those areas, Abergavenny, they're fairly affluent areas as well. So there's a different thing going on in those places. I would also suggest that we look at an audit of suitable land and also look at where there is existing interest and existing kind of quick wins where you could start something slowly. And I think this needs to be, I mean, I'm an artist, so I would say this, I think this is a cultural project. In what I mean by that is this is a culture shift project. So you need to shift the culture of thinking around this stuff, which is a big thing to try and do really quickly. So where there are community centres, where there are successful projects like Mayhill, we need to help resource and extend their capacity perhaps in order to develop this stuff and to develop confidence and learning in that space. And then maybe look at this master plan that you're developing, which might be 10, 15, 20 years worth of work in the future of thinking what will this city look like from a edible landscaping, green landscaping point of view, in that it's massively accessible to different physical abilities. It looks at how you engage asylum refugee communities and the status of the city as a city of sanctuary, for example. So there's all these opportunities and ways of doing this, but it's not going to be quick, and it need to look at what existing frameworks we have which we could lock into. So if there are community centres that we could kind of connect into to develop things, bearing in mind that there are lots of community centres all over Wales with dead stuff growing in raised beds outside them. So what are we not learning from those projects that we could then, you know, if you bring in a Todmorden thing and say, well, we've already got dead stuff in a raised bed in such and such community centre. So what is the culture shift we need to engage in locally? So that's my input anyway.
Thanks, Owen. I will come back to some of the things that you've mentioned. I think the idea about scale and resourcing is something that we need to discuss, and I think that there might be some tension between the kind of the ideal long-term vision and the quicker win of actually doing something, you know, soon, using land soon to make the best of it. Okay, so next I have Neil again, and then Tony, and then Joe. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, following on partly with Owen's point actually around the food and the processing of it. At Clidock, sort of when we had a surplus of food last year, there's T. Chryso is a food bank in Clidock, and they've been, you know, supporting, you know, families that have been referred to them and so on. But again, the issue that they came back was, you know, that yes, they can cope with dried and tinned food and so on, but you know, you give them fresh vegetables or something like that, they just don't have the skills there. So one of my proposals, if COVID hadn't happened this year, was to look at setting up some sort of cookery classes in the hall in Clidock, sort of to provide skills for people that they could, you know, produce cheap, nutritious meals. That was lost on that skills have been lost really. So I think that's a really valid point. Lifelong Learning used to run lots of good courses at Bryn House in Uplands. So I know that Bryn House is gone now, sort of, but you know, there are places that could run these type of courses on there. So that was the key point on there. I think we're quite lucky in Swansea with both the Community Growing Network and the project I'm involved with, Green Spaces, which is funded primarily by Swansea Environmental Forum. So we have got some infrastructure there. But of course, going back a few years ago, there was the Grow Local project that was supported by the council, which I think probably ended 2 or 3 years ago, and that, you know, created quite a lot of these new projects around Swansea. So again, you know, if the council was able to, you know, sort of support that in some way in the future, I think that would be a big help to coordinating it sort of both county-wide and also then at a local level as well. So that's me.
Thank you. Actually, I need to call Kat in before Tony and Joe because I missed her hand earlier. Go ahead, Kat.
Sorry.
Okay.
So I actually come from Trecastle, which is about 40 minutes from Abergavenny, in a very green area. So I really miss green living in Swansea, I can tell you that. As a wheelchair user, obviously growing things in the ground is extremely difficult. So it's going to need to be make sure that those with impairments are like catered for, and also that they know that they are allowed to use these like things, because a lot of the time you'll see these raised beds and stuff like that and think, oh well, no, that's not for me, I can't do that. We're not allowed to be able to touch that kind of thing. And also, sorry, I keep mixing up my words. It just needs to be made sure that it will be inclusive to those who do find it difficult to like bend and things like that, and that they can make use of these things. Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, that's fine. That's all really, it's really valid. It's really valid. I think it's about looking at the land that's available and the demographics and groups that are near that space, and maybe some plots are going to be easier to make more accessible than others, and then it's about how we connect the people with access issues to the more accessible spaces and make the spaces nearer them the most accessible. Lots and lots of stuff to discuss, definitely. Thanks, Kat. Tony?
Thank you, Kat. That's one of the things I was going to say was about disabled, but Kat beat me to it. Good girl. One or two things I'd like to discuss. First of all, I can't see any pecuniary incentive at all, right, for any tools or anything like that, So if these things are going to start up, they need to be some financial support from the local authority. And the other thing is, which is just a suggestion, under the Welsh Quality Housing Standards, right, they just undertaken the reconstruction of back gardens on 13,500 council houses. Now, surely something could be linked up with the local authority in relation to what they do into these back gardens, and maybe you can incorporate part of this scheme into that, and maybe help people to grow vegetables in their own garden under the same scheme, because if you read the detail of the Welsh Quality Housing Standards, they should be providing that, and in some places it will be impossible. I know that because I haven't been able to get into my back garden for 20 odd years, so that would be an acceptable fail. But in most cases they can help and further the agricultural benefits of everybody's back garden, and in doing so, create exercise for people and also make it accessible, hopefully, for disabled people to participate.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Tony. We are going to have probably another meeting at a later date to talk more specifically about garden sharing, how people who perhaps don't have a garden could use someone else's garden, and how people with gardens can develop their own skills and ability to cultivate their gardens. Thank you. I've got Joe next.
Yeah, I just wanted to add actually in relation to a point that Owen made. I should have mentioned actually that the local authority in Monmouthshire, they conducted an audit of spare land and they made that available. And I think subsequently Welsh Government gave them some money then to add some further detail to these maps in terms of other sort of growing resources and farms. And so just wanted to let people know that was available.
Thanks, Joe. I know that our own estates department has kind of made a bit of a start looking at plots which at least meet the Monmouthshire standard of being a quarter of an acre maximum. But also what Monmouthshire hasn't done is included meanwhile use for development land. So there may be a piece of council land that's on the disposal list for years and years that isn't shifting, and we'd like to think that we could offer that out for community growing until it is disposed of. So then the policy will need to be clear about rolling periods of use for meanwhile use and notice periods, and when in the year is it best to give a growing group notice that they won't be able to grow on that land anymore, and how much notice do they need, and stuff like that. So all of this is detail that we need to work out. I've got Ryland. Oh no, I've got Witch Hazel next, then Ryland.
Thank you. Yeah, I thought about the meanwhile land use. Is that some of the land that might be available may not be very good quality land, and it, as we know, it takes time to set up good soil and management practices for weed management and so on. So there would need to be, I think, some security around how long products would have to sort of put that work in. It's not it's not always that you can quickly grow stuff well in available land, is it? I have put some resources in the chat, which are some things I looked up that I thought might be helpful. And I don't know, I'm assuming that this group knows that social farms and gardens are giving out money for creating allotment space and community growing space. The deadline did pass. I can't remember, Neil, when that was, but just last week, I think. And it was rather unfortunate timing because the growing network that we're part of, we were changing workers from me to the new worker, and we didn't have capacity to really explore that. So there's only 3 areas in Swansea, 3 areas in Wales that are getting this allotment money, and Swansea's one of them, and we haven't really been able to address that properly. So Neil can say more about that, but he's contacted Social Farms and Gardens to see whether they would extend the deadline for us. You may already know about this, but because we should have access to some of that money for Swansea, but we weren't able to really address how that could be used. So that's one thought. Yeah, and then my other point is, I wonder, I think you've touched on the idea somewhere of, about food. You touched on food resilience, and one of the things I'm very aware of is that there is no local food resilience strategy for Swansea, and there really, really should be one. Cardiff and Bristol are both members of Sustainable Food Places and have really good cohesive food policies for the area that includes poverty and waste and food growing and other things in them. And we don't have that for Swansea. We don't have an officer that could deal with that. It's a real lack, and it's very worrying that we don't have food resilience policy in place. I'm sure you all know. So could this be part? Obviously, we are doing one thing here, which is we're part of the poverty reduction group, but could this be embedded in a wider policy, and how would that happen? And is there capacity to create that? Is an important thought I'd like to put forward. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Witch Hazel. So Neil has been in touch with Social Farms and Gardens and has copied me in, and we've had a bit of to and fro. I think we're going to have to wait for some information from them about what allotment projects have come forward successfully for funding, and then that'll be part of the landscape that we then work in going forward. So we are specifically not looking to set up allotments. So I think it's fine for them to do that, and for us to be aware of that and to help people get involved as they can. What we're trying to do is something kind of more flexible than allotments. And I guess again we're going to come up with this tension between the perfect and the immediately possible. And I'm often guilty of not taking a quick win, of putting in a bit more work and going a bit further and doing something that takes longer. This committee is well aware. But I think for this one, we have been asked to try and keep it very tightly focused on freeing up available council land for people to grow stuff. And the council really does not have resources to invest in this. It's going to have to be encouraging peer support out there in the community, or people who already have growing skills but lack space, being able to access space. It's not going to be as extensive as we might wish it to be, but that doesn't mean that there isn't an appetite, excuse the pun, for growing more of an overall food strategy at a later point, and then this would be a strand of that. The way that I think that the council freeing up land for people to grow food on could be an element that then gets taken into account if a wider food resilience strategy does get adopted. I think it is a real shame that the food and growing team is gone, but that is the nature of the beast when austerity strikes and you're having to strip down to the statutory bare minimum of your functions, and at the time there was nothing saying that the council had to have this service. And the small bits of function that we felt we needed were discharged to a social enterprise which developed when the food and growing team left, and the social enterprise sadly did not work out. So I think resourcing is going to be a very difficult issue going forward. It is. I will say in response to Tony's point that there is going to be a little bit of money when we launch this policy to invite community groups to be able to access tools, plants, seeds. It's not going to be very much, and it's not going to be ongoing. It's definitely going to be to start things up rather than as an ongoing fund, but there will be something there. And, you know, a question really is whether it would be better to give that money to a well-placed third sector organisation who's got systems set up and can do that in a more efficient grassroots level way than the council could. So that's another thing that we need to discuss once we've got the bare bones of an actual policy. I mean, like, who are we opening up our land to and what for? Okay, so thanks for all those points though, Witch Hazel. Next on my list is Ryland. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. 2 points, I think, at the moment. One is that for the councillors that are present, if you contact the Estates Department, they can produce relatively quickly an audit or an assessment of all the council-owned land in your wards. We've just had one done in Llansamnat, and it's quite startling to see how much land the council own that perhaps you're not aware of. There really is huge amounts of land in Llansamnat that, you know, even I wasn't aware of. And it's interesting to see how the council structure its ownership, because there are bits owned by housing and estates and education. But there is huge amounts of land that you don't realise is council owned. And I'm sure in all of your areas, the same thing would be present. So it'd be well worth getting in touch with Jeff Baton and asking for that list. When I first got involved in this sort of discussion about 15 years ago, one of the issues on which that discussion founded was if you're using gardens or some other sort of space and you're putting residents, council tenants in that instance, in touch with people to use their gardens in that instance. On that occasion, the whole sort of thing became really overwhelmed with bureaucratic crap, if I can use that term. There was things like police checks, risk assessments, and the whole thing, which should have been a simple business of saying, Mr. A lives in a flat and he wants to do some gardening, and the chap down the road has got a big garden that he can't manage, and you link the two people together, should be relatively straightforward. But as soon as you get involved with, say, a council being involved or some sort of public sector body, we had back to the risk assessments and police checks and that sort of stuff. And there's a bit of an expense in things like police checks and risk assessments. But B, it also becomes horribly complicated. And poor old Mr. A, who just wanted to go down the road and grow some lettuce and cabbages, suddenly gets put off by coming into contact with this huge bureaucratic pile of nonsense. So I'd be interested in how the, dare I use the term, experts that are present today sort of found that issue, and is it still a problem, which we found it was 15 years ago, and how do, say, groups like Inclidac or the other ones like the Veg, how do they get around the sort of bureaucratic stuff that this could become enmeshed in? Cheers.
Thanks, Ryland. I'll make a note that we want to talk about garden sharing and bureaucracy. Yeah. So when I've just cleared off the people who've got their hands up now, we'll come back to that discussion point. Okay. So I've got Peter next, and then I've got to be honest, I'm not sure if it was Neil or Les next, so be polite.
Okay, thank you, Mary. Yeah, first of all, just to reinforce Ryland's points about bureaucracy, as I said in relation to the Monmouth stream, it did strike me as unduly complex, with too many hoops to jump through, and hope that whatever scheme we come up with, we can avoid that kind of complexity. But the point I wanted to make, as we know from our green fairness exercise, or whatever we're now going to call it, we know from our green fairness exercise that green spaces aren't necessarily where the most deprived communities are concentrated. And I would have thought one of the concerns in terms of community gardening ideally would be that we would locate our community gardens in deprived areas. And I think that's a consideration that we need to bear in mind. And the reason I say that in particular, because I live in one of those leafy areas. I represent Sketty Ward on the City Council. And although we've got a deprived area of concentration in one part of the ward, it's neither leafy nor with green space available immediately to it. But what we do have, of course, in Sketty Ward, and here I'm going to sound incredibly heretical, but then what's wrong with being heretical? Singleton Park. I've walked through Singleton Park almost daily, and there are enormous areas in there of what I would only describe as green desert. Now, I appreciate that the council rightly, particularly through the COVID exercise, has been not mowing large areas, and that's been absolutely wonderful. We've had grasses allowed to grow, we've seen wildflowers appearing, seeding, and so forth. Marvellous. But it does strike me, walking around in Singleton Park, and I've thought this before in relation to allotment planting, but now I'm prepared to think of it in terms of a community garden approach. There are one or two very big areas that could quite safely be converted into community garden growing areas, at no great loss in terms of anything to the well-being of biodiversity in the park or the general landscape and appearance of the park, whilst providing very useful and almost certainly fertile growing space for the kind of exercise we've been talking about. And that, I think, is a consideration. Parks, I'll park that one with you, apologies. I also, of course, know that nearby we have the Botanical Gardens, and the Botanical Gardens, of course, are given over to growing ornamentals for flower and display and so forth. That's great. But I also know they've got something over 30 volunteers, far more than they actually need. And they've therefore got a waiting list of people who want to start doing something horticultural. And it may well be, therefore, that some of these folk would quite happily be prepared to grow lettuces and radishes instead of chrysanthemums and dahlias. So there's a potential pool of support there that we will might want to tap. And then finally, again, a different point, councillors at least will know that we're being encouraged to identify sites for children's play areas for development on council land, green space and so forth. So we need to bear in mind, I mean, I've got one in particular in my ward, which could just as easily serve as a community garden as serve as a converted children's play area. And there are arguments, of course, available for both. So there are sort of competing needs and issues. I'm not quite sure where I'm going with all this, but I've tossed all those thoughts in and I'll leave. But I think the key point is that ideally, if we're going to have community gardens, if possible, they ought to be in the areas where the people who could benefit from them actually live. And that may be a problem. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I think another consideration is whether those people actually have the time and the desire to actually get involved in growing. Sure. And actually, you know, what we might need to do is to match up the people with the time and motivation and energy for growing with the people who don't have that but who need the food. So I think that, yeah, there's a lot of kind of linking up to be done somehow, isn't there? Right, okay, so I think I'll go to Les next and then Neil. Thanks.
Thanks. Just picking up the point about bureaucracy, I think we've got to be careful here. We cannot avoid it completely. There is going to have to be some bureaucracy. All I can suggest is we've got to look to make it as simple, straightforward, as little as possible, and also make sure we give sufficient support so that bureaucracy becomes manageable to to the group. But I think it'd be totally disingenuous just to say, oh, we're not going to have to, oh, you can set up a group and you don't have to do any of it. That's not true. It's we don't live in that world anymore. The point about health and safety is a jolly good reason for that. It's because somebody might get hurt. So, I mean, you know, there is a lot of sense around a lot of the paperwork you have to do. So I think we've got to be careful about that. The point I was going to make was about the so-called meanwhile land. I think I would be very, very unsure about making use of that at all. And certainly I think we've got plenty of land across Swansea that I don't honestly think we need to go down that route. Certainly not at the moment. We could consider it later. But the biggest danger for me, it's not just about the end view that we're looking to help food poverty issues, but also let's have another think about the fact that these groups often form a brilliant source of well-being and mental health help, if you like, to the groups who are doing it. So it would be pretty crushing for a group to have got a scheme together, a project together, and worked really hard, and it's coming to fruition, and then suddenly somebody turns up and says, oh, sorry chaps, somebody's put in a planning application and that land's going to be taken over. So I think the meanwhile land has got to be very much at the bottom of the list. And as I say, I'm sure that in Swansea we've got plenty of green space all over the place that we could make use of first anyway. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Thanks, Les. Thank you. Okay, Neil, next.
Thank you. So going back first of all to Witch Hazel about social farms and gardens. So nationwide organisation, and with a very active and supportive Welsh group. And as Mary said, we've been toing and froing a little bit really sort of on there. They have had a couple of applications for new allotments in the Swansea area. So hopefully sort of something may come of those anyway. But if not, then they will, review the situation about how they might be able to support some more community growing sort of along the lines of what's being proposed on there. Yeah, also I think the point that Leslie made about, security, DBS checks and things like that, unfortunately, it is where we are, and risk assessments, in this sort of legitimate legal speak era sort of on there. They're the points. And again, yeah, I think the well-being and mental health, people do get very, number one, attached to a location, and also to the group of friends that get together as well. So that sort of the meanwhile land, unless we knew that definitely nothing was going to happen for 5 years or something like that, I think are really valid points sort of on there sort of. And yeah, and there is lots of spaces around in little corners that sometimes are of no development value whatsoever. Primrose Hill, for example, in Mount Pleasant is a good example of that. The ground, isn't going to be attractive to any sort of developers. So something like that, there's lots of little corners and pockets tucked away that hopefully can be utilised. And even if the landscape isn't great, raised beds and topsoil can be brought in if necessary, which also will then, they can be made, not all raised beds are actually suitable for disabled people, but you can construct ones that obviously are much more user-friendly for people with limited mobility or wheelchair users. So I've worked with groups on that in the past. So that was that.
Thanks, Neil.
Okay.
Right, I've got Joe and then Owen.
Sorry, I think my hand up was from the last time. Sorry about that.
Okay, that's fine. No worries. Owen.
Hi, I just wanted to pick up on some of that stuff, like the graph project at the National Museum. We do. Can you hear me? Oh yes, it is on. Sorry. We do actually connect up to the Community Fridge project in Carlas, which is just around the corner, and Matt's Cafe. But what's good about that is that these organisations to us are really close, but it does involve quite a lot of coordination with people on getting produce to them and getting these things processed. Whereas a lot of the time when we try to give away produce to some of our users, they're kind of not that interested in it, but they're interested in the process of being part of the garden, but not always in the cooking of the food. So depends on what else is going on in people's lives, doesn't it? But I think that linking to kind of resources that are already out there is super important. I also wanted to make the point that I hope you didn't think I was being too negative in saying that it's a massive thing. And I think there are lots of quick wins that could be done around how we activate existing spaces. And I think it's just about looking at the locations. When you said, Joe, about the kind of the audit that Monmouthshire had done, it'd be looking at the ways where you could actually succeed in Swansea, which would like link all this up. And the other thing to note was I put a few links in the chat as well of projects which are connected to different models, like a housing estate project in London, where John, a colleague of mine, worked with the community over a number of years. And actually what they did in the end was, instead of this housing association putting out a landscaping contract to a commercial bidder, is that the community set up their own community interest company in order to manage that resource. So that actually that land management thing went back into the community. So they were paid to develop their landscapes and to keep an eye on things and to develop edible systems. And he's actually been to Swansea and talked, and he's actually working with coastal housing at the moment as a consultant as well. So the other thing to think is that coastal are doing some stuff around this stuff. So other housing developers are doing this kind of projects with allotments and things like that, which I think has been a bit of a shift recently, which is quite interesting. And whilst I think, yeah, you're right, I think the council obviously, won't have loads of cash to do this, but even in just unlocking the land is a massive kind of culture shift in itself, and thinking about how we might enable this. And these are urgent times, obviously, so this is really important. But I think there needs to be a balanced approach by saying we can't resource this heavily, but also thinking how would the Environment Centre or the Swansea Community Growing Network support this if we were able to go for a grant, for example, to have experts like Neil who would be able to kind of hold the space for people. Because I think it's quite a daunting thing just to kind of start a garden and start afresh in this space. So I think you do need elements of support in these spaces, which are really, really important, so they have that level of success. Yeah, I think that was it, really. Those were the two things. It's really difficult remembering points you made about 10 minutes ago in your notebook and then trying to repeat them. So I may have forgotten something, sorry.
It is really difficult, Owen. When I first got elected, I found these sorts of meetings really difficult because I'm much used to having a small number of people around a table and everyone just chipping in, and it's much more fluid. But you do end up with people talking over each other. You do end up with people feeling overwhelmed and unable to speak. And on Teams, it totally doesn't work. So it is all very stilted and formal. But yeah, this is how we've got to try and do it. Thank you. Right. What I want to try and pull out then is, there was another thing we were going to talk about, which was pollution. So yeah, we talked about fumes and the problems of growing food really, really close to a road. So, and I know that in Todmorden this is a thing that happens. But I know, for example, Neil, this is something that some of the groups that you work with have flagged up, that they're not wanting to grow edibles in a space that's surrounded by a lot of roads. Could I have a bit more information about that from the growers in the room?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something I'm an expert on by any means, and it's more hearsay, sort of that that it's just something to be aware of and things like that. So I don't know, Witch Hazel, if you've got anything else, or Owen, that you wanted to chip in on that.
I'm just going to say that I bow to Neil's knowledge totally on this stuff. But apart from the fact that one of the things that we overcame at Graft was that obviously, and in Swansea, we have a lot of post-industrial landscapes. So it's not just necessarily an element of pollution from passing traffic, but it's long-term stuff in the ground. So we're literally on the docks. So what we've done is we've actually put a raised bed system in because it's much safer, and imported topsoil. So it's a balanced approach, I guess. But yeah, that's why linking to things like Natural Resources Wales, learning about pH testing soils and working out what the condition of those soils would be a really important part of that support that is needed in that kind of knowledge.
Okay, thanks, Owen. Witch Hazel, anything to add?
Yeah, so as part of the orchard project, because we're doing particularly in urban settings, we've been surveying sites recently and looking a bit into this question. And so with fruit growing, because yes, as Owen says, there is the issue of air pollution, but also ground contamination, often in urban sites, even if it's just housing, building contamination, or worse, industrial. So fruit growing is quite good for those sites because in general, yeah, you wouldn't want to grow like leafy things, but you could grow something that is a shrub or a tree that then has the food has an apple or has fruit on it. So then you have distanced yourself slightly. It doesn't mean you wouldn't have pollution. You still need to do the tests, but it does help a bit. So yeah, there is that. I'm actually looking into whether there's some way of testing the air for our orchards, some device we can get to sort of do some monitoring. So I'll be pursuing that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I can see that as well as kind of doing a land audit. And yeah, I think Ryland's right. I've seen the map for uplands that shows the available council land, and it's surprising the amount of land that's kind of up for negotiation for growing. But I guess we'd also perhaps need a bit of advice with that about, well, what could you or could you not grow in this space given the environmental factors? I wonder how we would resource getting that advice. So that's something that for the committee to bear in mind. Owen, you wanted to come in again?
Just to apologise that I've got to leave. I'm really sorry, and thank you so much. I've got to go and look after small children, and thanks for part of this conversation as it continues. Thank you.
Thanks for being here, Owen. We'll be in touch, okay? Thanks. Bye. Ryland, you wanted to come in?
Yes, I just want to, on the issue of the land and how you could use land in wards, etc. I think what we would need is a somewhat flexible and sensible approach from the various council departments, because we all know that particular pieces of land in our wards may well have been identified for certain functions, etc., but it may not be immediately needed. And what we should be able to do is negotiate with that particular department for use for it for, say, 3 years, on the understanding that after 3 years it'll be handed back for some other use. But in that 3-year period, we could actually use it for some sort of growing activity in this case. And we just need, I think, to, from this committee's point of view, try to make sure that the Estates Department and the respective council departments understand what we're about, and understand that we are trying to be proactive and get land into use, etc. And their part of the deal should be to free up some of that land and to have a bit of free thinking from the council officers as well.
Yeah, thank you. I should say that there has been a little working group of officers that's met a couple of times to kind of prepare the way and start some discussions prior to the PDC's bit. So the steer that we are getting about what needs to be in our policy is informed by those discussions with officers, and estates have been there and they're being very helpful. Actually, they're being very positive about it. I think taking Witch Hazel's point about meanwhile use and Les's point about meanwhile use, I think, yeah, it might be that we just don't need to go there. It might be that there's enough space already without needing to think about land that's already marked up for other purposes. Or maybe if there was a piece of land that was on the disposal list, but for some reason there was, some really pressing urge to grow food on it, maybe that could be done in a way that it could easily be moved, or I don't know, that there's all kinds of things that we need to kind of consider. I wanted to mention the Food Poverty Network. So
sorry, Mary, can I just add a little bit more about the meanwhile bit? Just to go straight from what you've just said. Yeah. I think if you were to use it, you would have to have a totally different approach. Say, for instance, I've got to compare with the community food garden in North Hill. Whereas that's not just a place for growing, it's got seating, it's got flower beds, it's got a wishing well. It's an area, it's a nice picnic area as well as growing space. And I think that's the point I was supposed to be making, so that if you were to use meanwhile land for a fixed period, I think you'd have to do it on a totally different level. It would have to be purely aimed at growing some food and not making it into a sort of community area as well as a growing area. Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's I see what you're saying exactly. Just be limited, very, very limited about what benefits we're opening it up for. Yeah. The food poverty network was established relatively recently. Obviously, when the COVID thing struck, everybody was running around trying to make sure that people got fed. And what was very interesting was that we had a lot of people who were not in financial hardship, but who couldn't access food. And that really got a big discussion going about the idea of food security. But now we seem to be more back in the space of it being about poverty, you know, and people on low incomes making the choice to eat very badly or very little when they're in a difficult financial situation. So there is now a Facebook group which is administered by a council officer, Tony Richards, and that is a place where different organisations can offer surplus that they have and make arrangements for that to be distributed. So, and I think that that's working really, really well. So it's reducing waste and making the most of leftovers through a really well connected network of people involved in food distribution. What I think I'm getting from this discussion is that we kind of like the idea of people being able to come in and help themselves, but we also kind of want to make sure that some food does get distributed to people who really need it. And I wonder if there's room in our policy for a statement that says, you know, half of the produce has to be distributed, perhaps through the food poverty network. Maybe it needs to be fed into the food poverty network and shared out that way, or maybe it needs to be taken on by the nearest food bank. And then we have to bear in mind that not all food banks handle fresh food at all anyway. So I think there's probably ways that we can be flexible about this, but yeah, I think this definitely needs some more thought, doesn't it? I've got Ryland and then Witch Hazel.
Oh, sorry, I haven't put my hand down from previous.
Okay, fine. Yeah, fine. Witch Hazel?
Yeah, just to echo what you've just said, really, and that I think alongside this policy, it would be really useful to have, to ensure the poverty side of it, to ensure that side of it, distribution is really important. And there's quite a lot of different ways, models throughout Wales of how people do this in different cities and towns, to link up the waste of fresh produce, as you say, because not all places will deal with the fresh produce. So that's a really key thing. It wouldn't be that difficult necessarily to set that up, but to have that alongside it, so it's not just help yourself, but also a group of people who are going to make sure that happens, that food gets distributed, is really great and would really make the most of it, I think. Yeah. I've put in the links an organisation, a network, which is Community Food Cymru Network, and we've been meeting all through lockdown, and it's been really interesting, therefore sort of linking with projects from all over Wales about different stuff, including food justice and food poverty. So that's been quite good, and it might be that we can get ideas from them or support from other people through that in some way.
Brilliant, thank you. Thanks. Kat, I've seen your hand go up.
Yeah, I really agree with being able to distribute the food that's grown. I wonder whether it's possible to link up with these food banks, and well, a lot of them are run by the third sector anyway, so they know who is using them, and if we're able to distribute fresh food to them, that is going to vastly improve their health and well-being, and maybe not necessarily help them lift themselves out of poverty, but it's certainly going to give them a step in the right direction, because energy and things like that are going to be helped. And yeah, that's all I wanted to say. That I think that distribution is a great thing, and we need to work with the first sector more to do that.
Yeah. Thanks, Kat. I mean, food banks themselves, I've got very, very mixed feelings about working with food banks at all, because obviously, you know, I know this committee aspires to a world in which we don't have them anymore, and they're quite a recent phenomenon, you know. And during the 90s, I worked in a lot of organisations where there was just food, you know. So when FareShare started up, food banks didn't exist, but they started distributing excess produce from factories and from supermarkets and taking it round to charities. You know, and you'd go in to pick up a leaflet about a benefit that you needed to apply for, and you'd leave with a pound of veg, and it didn't have the stigma that food banks have, you know. And I think that that's going to be something for us to think about as well. Those food banks that can take fresh food and can distribute it quickly so that it doesn't go off, bearing in mind that a lot of them are only open 1 day a week, so you know that limits their ability to handle fresh produce. I think where there can be an arrangement with a food bank, that might be ideal, but also just making sure that it gets put somewhere where we know that the people who need it will be able to pick it up, might be a good way of doing it, and of reducing the stigma surrounding food poverty. And that is something that you know, the universality of the incredible edible model does. It removes the stigma. Just go and pick it. Anyone can go and pick it. You don't have to be deprived. You don't have to be struggling. Anyone can go and pick it. But I think on reflection of all the points that we've already discussed today, in Swansea, something else needs to take place. Thanks, Kelly. Kelly's leaving, so thanks, Kelly, for being here. We'll have more discussions about this. Don't worry that you have to leave early. It's fine. Witch Hazel, you wanted to come in again?
Yeah, just a very quick point, which is one of the things I also noticed, along with people not wanting to use food from a community garden, is that if it comes out of the ground kind of a bit muddy and a bit dishevelled and a bit rough looking, as you know, general growers, we're all kind of okay with that, but some people find that really off-putting if they're not used to homegrown food, and so sometimes sort of a little bit of preparation time. So sometimes distributing it is part of the education of getting people to use local produce, because it can be a little bit managed and prepared for people in a way they can recognise. Sometimes that can just be a little bit of a barrier, I think, to people using fresh produce.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder about the scope for sort of pick your own carrots, pick your own potatoes. You know, would that get over the barrier? Do you know what I mean? If people are actually going into a space and helping themselves and getting their hands dirty, then that they're going to be proud with what they take home. You know, I'm thinking about children and how you get kids familiar with where food actually comes from. So maybe that's something that we could consider. I know that there are some food banks started around that have community gardens and allotments or growing schemes kind of attached to them themselves. So I know Clitter Community Garden, which Neil runs, gives food to their local food bank, and the Ponty project, you know, Ponta de Lice, they have a food bank and a growing project, and the one feeds together. So I'm sure that there are ways of working through food banks to get this done, but they might not be the only device. So it might be something to do with saying that a proportion of the produce grown needs to be distributed in that way. Now, the Room to Grow project, I did invite them to come along. They've obviously not been able to join us, but I'm really familiar with how they work so far. I'll be careful about that, because I know that they're really innovative and they're really flexible and they're all ever evolving, and they will grow and adapt and do things differently. But for the pilot which they ran in Uplands this summer, from June to September, they had a model which went like this. They got permission to use people's front gardens, and some of those front gardens were run by HMO landlords, and some of them were run by owner occupiers. And agreements were drawn up to grant volunteers access to the space, And so they're working as a team under the umbrella of Room to Grow, not as isolated individuals. So they've got, you know, the policies and the safety elements were all covered by Room to Grow as an organisation. And then the produce was shared out in thirds. So a third went to the householder who owned the space. A third went to the volunteers who had worked the space there and grown the produce, and a third got sold and the money went to local charities. And I know that in future they also want to involve other charities. They want to be able to supply food banks and things like that, but they are a social enterprise with a need to generate income in the longer term, so they will be needing to sell produce and get revenue at some point. But what I know they found a bit tricky with the idea of splitting it into thirds seems fine, and it kind of worked, but I know that what they found difficult was this thing of what Angie calls a rolling harvest, where things aren't all ready at the same time. It's like, sounds great to just get everything in and split it into thirds, but that isn't how it works. And different gardens in different locations had different growing times. So even though things might have been planted at the same time, they were maturing at different rates. So it wasn't all coming in together, and then trying to make sure that it kind of got shared out and allocated fairly became a bit of a headache. But I'm sure that that is something that we can learn from. Right, okay, there aren't any more hands up. I think we've had a really, really good discussion. It's 10 minutes till the close of the meeting, and we do just need to have a quick look at our ongoing work plan. So I think I'm going to wrap up this discussion about food growing, and I think we will have a working group to discuss this more, and we'll look at some of the resources that our guests have shared with us and see if we can keep scouting around for good practice that we might be able to copy, as well as finding out a little bit more about how things are going over in Monmouthshire. Okay, so it's a public meeting. You're welcome to stay with us or leave as you wish, Neil, Witch Hazel, it's up to you. But thank you very much for being here and for your contributions today. Thanks.
No, thank you very much. We'll say cheerio. Bye.
Bye, Neil. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks, Witch Hazel. Right, okay, so we were just going to have a quick recap of our work plan, where we are up to, and what else needs to be happening. So the work plan has all kind of been drawn up, and I'll give you updates that I'm aware of, and I'll ask Joe to give me a bit of backup and chip in if there's anything that I forget. So the green fairness policy has been subject to some interesting and ongoing discussion about what it should be called. I had a very helpful meeting with our Deputy Chief Exec, Adam, recently, who did feel that it's just not enough. If you read the policy, then the title makes complete sense, and it's a great title, and it's short and it's to the point. But if you haven't read it, the title doesn't really explain what it's about. So for the benefit of Tony and Kat, who I know won't be familiar with this is a policy which says, we know that people who live in our deprived areas tend to be lower in income, and they have a lower life expectancy, and they have poorer health. And they also don't have a great natural environment around where they live. They're less likely to have trees growing outside on the street. They're less likely to be exposed to greenery when they're just going out from their home to the shops or nearby. Whereas, in the more affluent areas, there's more greenery, and that has a direct impact on people's physical and mental health. Even just seeing a tree out your window lowers your blood pressure. So what this committee is really keen to do is develop a policy which says we need to improve the greenery in our deprived neighbourhoods as a matter of fairness to do with health inequality. So we're trying to think of a name that sums up that policy commitment. But where we are up to with it is that I've asked for a meeting to be set up with Councillor Mark Thomas and Martin Nichols, because Adam felt, and I agree, that the teams who will be kind of subject to this policy, who will need to pause and think about this policy and implement it in the way that they work, all sit under Mark Thomas, really. So we're going to be bringing him in on the discussion. The corporate debt policy, we have some work to do. Anthony has done a really great job of kind of stripping it down to the bare bones of a policy intention, without a lot of the detail that was in the original draft. But I'm going to be calling a working group for us to look at that in more detail. So again, for Tony and Kat, this is a policy that aims to set out in a transparent manner the way that the council collects debt from people who owe the council money, and that it does so fairly and minimising stress as much as possible. And really, it's time for the Poverty Forum, which is an internal group of council teams and departments, to have a big discussion about their different debt collection practices and how they can be brought together under one policy that's kind of comprehensive and clear. The committee has discussed before how the draft doesn't really explain what the debt collection practices are. And, you know, in some cases, so for example, for rents, and now also for car parking penalties, there's a very, very clear process. First there's this letter, then after a while there's this letter, then after a while there's that letter. But there are a whole different loads of debt collection processes going on across the council. However, we are agreed, and I think Adam was quite sympathetic to the idea that communication is really important, and the fundamental purpose of the policy is to encourage people to contact the council as soon as they possibly can, and to see the council as an organisation that will be supportive and helpful, rather than punitive and authoritarian, so that we can try and minimise people's stress around debt. Christine has joined us. Hi, Christine. So, Chris, we finished the discussion about food community growing, and we are just now talking about our work plan. So I'm just giving everyone a little update. So we need to have another working group to look at the corporate debt policy and see what we want to ask the Poverty Forum to do with it next, what more information we want to put in there to make sure that it is, you know, the clear policy that we want it to be. Benefit take-up is something that we have put on our action plan. You will all be aware that we took a motion, Councillor Alison Pugh and I took a motion to council earlier this month, which was passed unanimously, calling for a pension credit take-up campaign. And as that kind of shapes up, there will be some lessons learned that we can take into future benefit take-up campaigns, and we'll be asking the welfare rights advisors to speak to us about which benefits they think we should particularly focus on next. The promotion of affordable credit policy. There is some work to be done on this as well. It went to CMT, corporate management team. They were very supportive of it and really did point out the fact that it needs more in it about ownership. Who is responsible for overseeing this policy and making sure that it is adhered to and monitored and effective. So I think the officers, mainly Amy's team, Tony, really, the Tackling Poverty Service, are going to have to do a little bit more work on that, which I'm sorry about because I know how busy and snowed under they are. But they will be important additions to the action plan and the covering report when the policy does go forward to Cabinet. And we are now working on public consultation. So you'll have received the draft, which I circulated, and you're all welcome to comment on. And as soon as we have a set of questions that we're happy with for a survey, that can go out to public consultation. Even I think while the officers are still working on the additional detail about kind of oversight and monitoring of the ongoing policy. Tony, yes, you have your hand up. You're on mute though still, Tony.
Sorry, will we be part of that? Because there's a lot of interest in stuff coming up.
Yeah, sure. So what I think we need to decide with the co-production network is how you want this to work. Do you want, for example, would it be the two of you, Tony and Kat, that are always here for every meeting? Or would we say that the co-production network will always have 1 or 2 seats on our committee and will always be informed when we're having a meeting, and any 2 members of the network might come along? I don't really mind how it works, but certainly, yes, we want you to be aware and informed. So what we'll do is we'll treat you as members of the working group, and we'll be able to send you the drafts of what we've produced so far, and try and get you involved in the discussion. And you can also share the drafts with other members of the network and have discussions about them, you know, prior to going out to formal consultation.
Sorry, I
okay?
just got ticked off and didn't hear what Tony said.
Okay, so Tony was asking how the two of you will be involved in taking forward work that we've already started without your involvement. And I think it's just that I need to make sure that you're up to speed. So I'll make sure that you've got drafts that we've already produced and can be involved in those going forward. Okay.
I knew with the co-production network, they are keen that there is always somebody that sits on this forum.
Yeah.
But it might not always be me and Tony.
Right.
It might it might be one of us every time, but
Yeah.
we're gonna see what's been talked about and then who wants to do it, kind of thing, just to share it out.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. That's fine. So I think what I'll probably do is send the drafts that I've already mentioned, the things that we've got that are kind of in progress. I'll send them all to Adrian and ask him to kind of share them out and make the network aware that this is what the committee's working on, and then whoever's best placed can come along to working groups and meetings when we're discussing them. Right. Does that all sound all right with the rest of the committee to work with the co-production network in this way? Yeah. Thank you. Right, okay, so we've gone just over 5 o'clock. Jo, have I missed out any important updates? No?
Nope, I don't think so. You've covered it all, Mary.
Okay, thanks very much. Jo's also been working on a sort of timetable for meetings so that we can plan ahead what sort of speakers we're going to have and what we're going to be working on. But she and I need to do a bit more work on that together before we unleash it on you. So we'll be planning a working group soon to look at the corporate debt policy for sure. And I will let you know how my meeting with Councillor Mark Thomas and Martin Nichols goes about the green fairness, or whatever we decide to call it, policy. Okay, we've had a really productive meeting. Thank you very, very much, everybody, and I'll see you all soon. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, folks. See you soon.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
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 Bye.